Okay, now you can start my time. So I have 10 minutes. I'm Ellen Marciel. I live at 3808 Vista Campana South, house number 40 in Oceanside. I am chair of an HOA, a board-appointed ad hoc committee to inform and engage the Oceana residents. I represent all of my neighbors in Oceana, many of whom are here tonight wearing white shirts and colorful buttons. Wave hello, Oceana neighbors. Thank you. Thank you. There are many more neighbors who wish they could have been here tonight. We are a very engaged community and have already sent in over 200 letters, as Manny had said, in opposition to this apartment tower. In addition, we have had town hall meetings with Mayor Sanchez and Councilmember Eric Joyce to discuss this project. I wish that everyone here could talk to you tonight about their love of community, the nurturing environment of a senior community, and the amazing views on almost every corner. But thanks to the state density bonus law, none of that matters. And all we can do to protest this proposed apartment tower is to prove specific adverse impacts, such as health and safety, that this project will result. We are now going to hand you several reasons to deny this application. Oceanside Community Association, known colloquially as Oceana, is a vulnerable senior community built in the late 1960s. Oceana consists of 932 single-story homes on 144 acres. Ages of residents vary from 55 into their 90s. This project, as presently proposed, does not belong here. Taking advantage of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment and the California Density Bonus Law, the requested 16 waivers are designed to allow the developer's desired density for the site to be achieved. It fails to make a dent in Oceanside's need for affordable housing. The lot includes a section that abuts El Camino Real that is unusable, but is still included in the developer's density calculation and landscape calculations. It is quite simply a developer grab, fitting a size 10 foot into a size 4 shoe. It is also an infill development with no consideration of the surrounding development, such as the Lennar project currently under construction on nearby Stagecoach Lane. First, let me show you what the site looks like now as standing on the west side of El Camino Real across from the gas station. So you can see the gas station's there on the lower right, the church is in the upper right, and the existing two-story office building is there. Now let me show you a CAD rendering done by an architect who lives in our community of what the development will look like from the same vantage point. Because the developer, although that animation was quite interesting, we'd never seen that before, and the developer never submitted an adequate photo simulation other than that animation you just saw, we made this one ourselves. This also does not even show what the retaining wall will look like because we simply don't know what it will look like. There again is the before and after, the before on the top and the after on the bottom. So here are the 5 health and safety issues that we're going to present to you that you can use to deny this application. The first one is ingress and egress. This is a map of our community. 2 single-lane roadways. Jaylee, can you show those? Thank you. 2 single-lane roadways, Vista Ray and Vista Oceana, both exiting onto El Camino Real, are the only ingress and egress points for an area that now encompasses over 1,265 homes. If you include the Oceana condos, Vista de Oceana, Ocean Point, and now 503 Vista Bella. Visitors to the church and the golf course will only further compromise traffic flow. Issue number 2 is also a safety issue, and it's vehicular access. With an aging population struggling with chronic health issues, Oceana finds itself requiring the frequent services of local fire and paramedic professionals. Traffic backed up at Vista Oceana and Vista Ray will negatively impact the ability of emergency vehicles to access the community. In addition, since the apartment tower residents won't have enough on-site places to park, many of them will be parking on the adjacent streets, further impacting emergency vehicle access. Number 3, pedestrian safety. Many of Oceana's residents are daily walkers, and several are vision or hearing impaired or both. Because the developers of the apartment tower are marketing to young professionals, the new residents will likely be people who live at a much faster pace than we do. Oceana's current inadequate infrastructure, including a lack of bike lanes and sidewalks within 2 feet of the roadway, are an accident waiting to happen. Number 4 safety issue is the slope instability. The site of the proposed tower is on a slope which has proven to be unstable. Landslides have occurred for decades. The applicant's architect just acknowledged that on his slideshow, although he didn't read it out loud, I noticed. This is the 1997 slope repair plan for the Coastline Church property. And you can see in the middle, there's that gray area where the slope failed and the soil came down onto the sidewalk and onto the road. That handwritten note, I'll blow it up for you now and I'll read it, says, in part, and it was written by the city engineer, again in 1997, reads in part, this plan was prepared as a result of a slope failure and a nuisance declaration by the city. Climate change and increased total rainfall, which in turn is causing flooding and slope failures in our area. The existing two-story office building on the proposed tower site is shifting and has structural cracks and broken windows as a result. The site is clearly unstable. The following photos show actual landslides from earlier this year, from the site of the proposed tower down onto the Oceana gas property below. Another larger slope failure at this particular location could result in an environmental disaster due to the hazardous materials at the existing gas station being in the direct landslide path. So the photo on the left, again, you can see the building, the two-story office building at the top, and you can see where the slope failed onto the ground below. That's the back of the gas station. There was some significant damage there. That was about a year ago. This photo reveals a current slope failure that continues to erode the contiguous hillside along El Camino Real. This would be heading north towards Mission. Another photo of the slope that's failing. The last issue is one of health. The proposed tower will block the cooling ocean breezes and obstruct the warming sun and adversely affect the ventilation within nearby homes. So I know this is hard to see, but thank you, Jaylee, the little tiny person on the right is standing in front of his or her home. And then on the left is the gas station at the foot of the hill. On the left is the gas station all the way down there. Yeah, thank you. And then that middle white rectangle is where the new tower would be. So you can see, and this is from the developer's submittal actually, you can see the little black person has a line of sight, and the architect acknowledged this, that where they're right now currently looking into the beautiful Oceana Valley and the airport, they will now be looking into someone's fourth floor bedroom. This is a photo from approximately that same vantage point as the little person on the previous slide. This is how it looks today, and then this is how it will look once the building is built. If you don't find that these 5 health and safety impacts are enough to warrant the denial of this project, then please consider the following mitigation measures. To offset the negative safety impact of ingress and egress for Oceana residents, the City of Oceanside must create an evacuation plan for Oceana in light of the added traffic and homes that have been approved between us and our only 2 means of egress. To offset the negative safety impact of increased traffic, we would request that the city impose an age restriction on the development. If the tower is occupied by senior citizens, the problems associated with fast-paced residents would be eliminated. Also, senior communities generally have fewer cars. If the development cannot be age restricted, or frankly, even if it can, we would still request that the city install a 3-way flashing pedestrian beacon with call buttons at the intersection of Vista Campana and Vista Bella in front of the new apartment tower. To offset the negative safety impact of the slope instability, the city should require the developer to produce engineered drawings demonstrating how the 1.74-acre parcel will be shored up to support a 6-story building plus 1-story underground, as well as the structural details, as Commissioner Balma already pointed out, for this massive retaining wall prior to approval by this board. To offset the negative health impact of reduced airflow and ventilation, we will request that the developer establish a trust fund in the amount of $200,000. If we can demonstrate that the interior temperatures of the adjacent homes increased or decreased once the apartment tower was erected, we will use the trust fund to restore the interior temperature of the homes to what they were prior to the tower construction. If it turns out the tower has no impact on the temperature of the homes, the entire amount would be returned to the developer. One final note. If the city will not impose any of these mitigation measures, then we would request the city at least restrict the development to what is allowed under the existing zoning. What is allowed by right is 51 residential units and a height of 50 feet. We want reasonable development in our neighborhood. We are not anti-development. I'm almost done. We are a diverse community of reasonable seniors, including renters, low-income households, and homeowners on fixed incomes. Let me close by saying the City of Oceanside ultimately has the responsibility to maintain our infrastructure and ensure the safety and health of our residents, regardless of what kind of irresponsible, misplaced, and greedy developments are allowed by state law. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Next, up next for our group speaker, we have a group of Jonathan Tellis, Mark Dooley, John Tellis, and Beth Barnum. You also will have 10 minutes to speak.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Jonathan Tellis, and I'm representing a group from the church. Our church used to own the property at 503 Vista Bella, and we sold it in 2005 to purchase the property next door at 547. Part of the negotiation of the sale was to implement this easement agreement. Our church purchased the rights to this easement, and these property rights are certainly of value to us as they were part of our long-term planning for the church. The agreement was documented and agreed upon by both property owners, and this agreement runs with the land and is binding on all successors. The agreement is not dependent upon the city parking code and was put together in such a way to prevent this very type of redevelopment from taking place. Now, just a few minutes ago, I was encouraged to hear Ms. Gallagher say that they would be willing to abide by the terms of the agreement. The agreement states in first page, as a further condition of the reciprocal parking agreement, the parties covenant and agree that no building or other structure shall be placed, installed, or constructed within the areas covered by the said easements in such a manner as to obstruct or impair the ingress, egress, and parking on the respective parcels. It could be interpreted that maybe after the building was completed that they'll just park on ours and we could still park on theirs. During construction period, ingress and egress is going to be blocked, still a violation of the agreement. Neither shall either party materially diminish the number of parking spaces without the prior written consent of either party and the city of Oceanside. These parties agree to execute the grant a reciprocal agreement and the form attached to this agreement, Exhibit C. It's 14 pages long. It spells out the whole area that is being referenced. Earlier tonight, I was able to read the staff report. The staff report says that the stalls available to the church at the project site are not necessary for the church to meet the parking requirements of the zoning ordinance. Therefore, the staff's recommendation is to approve the project. The language they said in there is that it's not necessary. I was genuinely shocked the city put that into writing and presented it tonight because that is a clear RLUIPA violation. Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, or RLUIPA, is a federal law that was unanimously passed by both houses of Congress in 2000 that protects religious institutions from land use and zoning regulations that impose a substantial burden on their religious exercise. This was signed by President Clinton in the year 2000. RLUIPA does not allow the city to rely on general zoning standards to decide what is necessary for a religious institution to function effectively. Our church established this reciprocal parking agreement to meet the specific demands on high attendance days such as Easter, Christmas, baptism celebrations, open house, anniversary, missions conference, revival meetings, VBS, and other significant religious gatherings. These draw far more congregants than typical attendance, and it was precisely for these peak days and opportunities for growth that the easement was created. RLUIPA is clear. Religious institutions have the right to define their own needs without undue interference from the government. General zoning compliance may be adequate for routine operations, but it falls short for what our church requires for its mission. By ignoring the need for our parking and dismissing it as unnecessary, the city's recommendation directly contradicts RLUIPA's protections. Even when a land use decision doesn't directly target religious exercise, courts have held that indirect burdens such as denying access to parking can violate RLUIPA. RLUIPA protections are not limited to what happens inside church walls. They extend to the entire property, including the area which we have rights to park. In Paso Grill Beach Community Church versus the City of St. Pete Beach in 2022, the court upheld that parking restrictions on a church constituted a substantial burden under RLUIPA. That case recognized the ability to gather safely and conveniently is integral to religious exercise. Our church should have the same protections, and I ask the commission to recognize this in your decision tonight. The city staff report says that the city will not enforce the reciprocal parking agreement's terms, treating it as a civil matter between two private parties. However, the agreement explicitly requires city consent for any reduction in parking or new construction within the easement area. By recommending project approval without addressing the easement, the city effectively overrides our legally established rights. I think we all know that if SDG&E had an easement on this property in question, the staff would not be recommending this project for approval. So this is not a request for special treatment. We are just simply asking for equal rights. The right to operate our church as we always have without interference or restrictions from the government that compromise our ability to serve our congregation. To illustrate this troubling inconsistency in the city's approach to easements, I'd like to share a recent experience. Just last Friday, I visited the planning desk to request a permit exemption to build a fence in my backyard, which has a small HOA easement. My request was denied due to that HOA easement. So the city will enforce an HOA's easement to prevent me from building a simple backyard fence, yet it's willing to recommend approval for a 6-story apartment building that disregards the parking easement we rely on to conduct religious services safely and effectively. This double standard is concerning. The city should not enforce easements selectively based on convenience, especially when the easement in question protects the rights of a religious institution. The city has a responsibility to treat all easements equitably, not just when it serves a specific agenda. Now, let me turn briefly to the state density bonus law. While this law was enacted to promote affordable housing, it does not provide carte blanche for developers to override existing property rights or inflate project density without accountability. Density bonus laws grant concessions and waivers only when they don't conflict with state and federal law and do not infringe upon property rights. In this case, there are multiple conflicts with laws existing. So there's the health and safety aspect of the framework of the law, but then there's another category that talks about it cannot be in conflict with other laws. Conflicts with state and federal law, by diminishing or eliminating our easement-based parking, the proposed project violates the First Amendment, which protects free exercise of religion, the Fifth Amendment, and the California State Constitution's taking clause, which prohibit government actions that take or damage property rights without just compensation. While the city may not be physically taking the easement, its actions in approving the developer's project would have the effect of rendering the easement worthless. This is considered a regulatory taking, where a government decision deprives the owner of the use and enjoyment of the property without just compensation. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, RLUIPA, which protects against local land regulations that substantially burden religious exercise. While we are committed to protecting our easement rights, but there's one other area too. In the calculations that they're requesting for density bonus, baked into their calculations is roughly 15,000 feet that they don't have full control over. That is area which we have property rights, and we would like that to be taken into consideration in the calculation. While we are committed to protecting our easement rights, we are also open to finding a solution that meets the needs of both parties. We are willing to work with the developer to explore a compromise where he can achieve his project goals, and we can retain the parking access that is vital to our congregation's needs. Unfortunately, the notice for the community meeting intended to address such concerns was postmarked May 14th from Seattle, and we received it only after the meeting took place on May 16th. We have since reached out to the developer multiple times over the last month over email, but our efforts to communicate have gone unanswered. In closing, I urge the Planning Commission to consider the serious implications of approving this project in its current form. And here are our main points. Number one, the city's reliance on zoning minimums to dismiss our parking needs is misguided. Coastline Baptist Church established this easement to meet high attendance demands, and RLUIPA protects our right to determine our own needs. The city can't define our needs and then make approval recommendations based on how they interpret that. We have the right to determine our own needs for religious exercise without undue burden. Number two, the city's decision not to enforce the easement contradicts its consistent enforcement of other easements and effectively overrides our legal rights. We're not asking for special treatment. We simply seek equal treatment to enforce the rights which we have relied on for nearly 2 decades. And then the density bonus law. Density bonus law has limitations. It was touched on briefly in the presentation earlier. They're few and far between, but there are limitations to density bonus law. It does not grant unrestricted power to developers to ignore legally binding agreements or calculate density based on areas that they do not fully control. We sold that property in 2005. We purchased our current property, and the property in question at 503 has been sold, I think, at least 3 or 4 times since then. If you get ready to purchase the building, the developer would have had the opportunity to get a title report and see that there are 3 easements that the church has on the property, and this would have been a known factor in that time. I respectfully request that the Planning Commission either deny this project as it stands or require significant revisions that respect the church's established rights, accurately represent density, and comply with federal and state protections. Thank you for your time in considering our concerns.
Please. I know this is an emotionally charged issue. We still have some more comments to get through. I appreciate everyone's desire to demonstrate that, but let's try to keep this thing rolling. Thank you very much. Commissioner Rosales, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, everybody, for your input. I guess I would swing my question.
Excuse me, Commissioner Rosales, there still may be more public comments to come. Those are just the formal presentations from the groups, so there may be additional speakers.
Okay,
Maybe
I
we
will
get through
pause
that.
my question. Oh, stop, Tom.
Thank you, everybody. Yes, we do have a few individual speakers, so if you would please come up. You're going to have your 3 minutes to speak. Looks like, Jonathan, you were involved in a group, so I'm going to mark you as spoken. So Megan On, you will be up, and please come to the lectern, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Dear members of the Oceanside Planning Commission, upon reviewing the traffic impact study for the 503 Vista Bella development, I have concerns about the Planning Commission's ability to capture accurate data related to pedestrian and bike access. I noticed in section 3.0, existing conditions, it states incorrectly that there are bike lanes provided northbound and southbound along El Camino Real. Under Appendix E, a very different description is provided and is somewhat more accurate. To be clear, currently, our community has 0 safe bike access along El Camino Real in either direction, and the traffic impact study does not include bike or pedestrian data. In addition, and equally concerning, is the current pedestrian sidewalk access from Vista Rey north to Mission. On the east side of El Camino Real, there is a sidewalk that is only 4 feet wide and includes areas that have overgrown ice plants where the 4 feet narrows to roughly 3 feet. Additionally, there are what looks like electrical equipment boxes on that sidewalk, and again, narrows that sidewalk to roughly 3 feet. On the west side of El Camino Real, there is a sidewalk that dead ends not far from the intersection of Mission and El Camino Real heading south. This very old infrastructure design forces our community to use the sidewalk on the east side for pedestrians going both directions and bicyclists going both directions at the same time and navigate around areas where the sidewalk narrows from 4 feet to 3 feet along that stretch. I believe it would be a grave injustice to approve Vista Bella before the city of Oceanside fixes the unsafe and poorly designed current infrastructure to ensure our community and future Oceanside residents are able to safely travel along El Camino Real in a car, on a bike, and as a pedestrian. I humbly ask the Commission to advocate for a future that is safe for all residents and encourages the ability for residents to safely drive, bike, and walk. Approving this project prematurely is not safe for our community and future residents. Thank you.
Vice Chair, that concludes our pre-registered speakers.
Do we have anybody else in the audience that wants to come forward to speak? Commissioner Rosales?
Thank you. Several, I think. And thank you, everybody, for your input. I think I'll start with a clarification, and maybe this goes to staff and city attorney and maybe legal counsel for the project. Just to get terminology correct, so I referred to a parking agreement between the two parties. Jonathan referenced an easement, so then is tied to partly, as I understood it, to the density bonus. So, Ms. Gallagher, I believe, you made a comment, if you wouldn't mind coming forward. You made a comment when I referenced the parking agreement that, as far as you're concerned, that's still in place, you're good with it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
How do you understand that dovetails into the terminology that Mr. Tellis used, and that's the easement?
So it's an agreement. He's using the term easement, and we're using the term agreement. It is an agreement
Okay.
between the parties, and we will abide by it. We were just chatting over here. We have 36 spaces now. There will be 35 surface spaces right there, so it's equivalent to, they can certainly still use those spaces. I think to the point that the agreement never contemplated any construction, that could not be the case, that they intended to prohibit construction forever. So the idea that there might be a temporary disruption, I think, is entirely consistent with the agreement, and thereafter we intend to abide by it.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Tellis, not to put words in his mouth, was okay with the construction phase of, not having complete access. But then that... Okay. And maybe we can bring up Mr. Tellis afterwards. The suggestion that the easement that the church still has as part of the title conflicts maybe with the density bonus portion of the development. Maybe this is a staff or city attorney thing. Did I hear that right? I mean, I think, so is that, how do you see that? I'll put it that way.
Yes, thank you. So he's suggesting that there's a ROPLA violation, and therefore that state density bonus law, which prohibits a project that conflicts with state or federal law, and he's trying to tie this together. That is not the case. There would not be a ROPLA violation because we intend to abide by the agreement. There's no impact to the church from the perspective of federal law, and there's certainly not a density bonus law issue. There's no conflict between this project and state or federal law.
City attorney, can I get your nod or your input on that same issue?
Yes, I agree. This is not, the church's project, the church's rights are not at issue in this decision. It's the applicants, the adjacent property, the owner of the adjacent property whose rights are at issue here.
But again, and maybe I misunderstood partly, but I agree with what you just said, that the rights of the church might not be imposed upon, but the development itself may have some impact on the church's rights. And again, I don't know if I understood that completely, but maybe you can expand on your thought you just had.
Sure. And I want to go back a little bit to the agreement does create easement rights in the church. So that's the correlation between the agreement and the easement rights. But nothing that the city is doing, nothing that the Planning Commission is doing, if they approve this project, would impair the church's ability to enforce its rights under, its easement rights under that agreement. So that's the main point I wanted to make.
Okay.
We're not interfering with the church's rights.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Gallagher.
Yeah.
Last, it's not really a question, but I will say the Oceana group that came up, excuse me if I don't remember your name, from the ad hoc committee, I thought your ideas on solutions was novel. I actually like them. And actually, I do have a question from that. Age restriction, I thought was a really novel idea. I don't need you to come up. Maybe I can. Thank you, though.
Okay.
Age restriction, I thought was a novel idea to kind of present one solution in terms of traffic and access. Maybe this is a question for staff. Does that parcel or the applicant, is that parcel any part of Oceana which has the, as I understand it, an age restriction covenant, or is it completely clear and free of that? It doesn't have one. No. Okay. Still, I thought that was a novel idea. I did like the provide engineering drawings as it relates to the slope instability. I have an engineering background, and I know I have a great deal of comfort in seeing something in detail for an issue that we think is real, as a number of us has pointed out. So perhaps we can bake that into what we end up doing here ultimately. And the last one, and I'll leave it at that, the $200,000 trust fund, I thought it was also pretty novel too. So good ideas, good solutions. I'm glad you spent time on coming up with these. That's all I have.
Commissioner Ballmer?
Yeah, I kind of agree with what you just stated with what the Oceana people came up with their points. I think that all of them actually might be considered by the applicant. They didn't seem like it would be too expensive to add an evacuation plan study, which doesn't take that much time and effort. Age restriction, I mean, that's kind of a hard one. Flashing call button, the thing for the traffic, that sounds easy. Slope stability, I really think that's important because really what you guys are doing is on that piece of ground, as we've all seen for years, the landslides. So I hope that you could just have that within your study you've already done, probably even to build this. You must already have that information already worked out, so that could just be something you could just present to us. And then, yeah, the trust fund was another novel idea. The parking, back to the parking and the easement thing, it sounds like between the applicant and the church, there's going to be some kind of come to Jesus, so to speak, that you're going to be able to agree on something here, right? But the only thing that is kind of not really happening is when you're under construction, which could take about a year or maybe more, there's going to be still a parking problem for the church. So maybe you could consider helping the church out with a valet service for those times when they can actually park on site. It wouldn't take that long, but I mean, at least your patrons wouldn't have to have a problem with that. I'm not sure how much that would cost, but I mean, just maybe there's a way to kind of get around the idea of not being able to park on that site during those times during construction. So I think, I'm not sure if the applicant's going to be agreement to any of this stuff, but we've kind of been talking about, but I kind of think if we can agree with some stuff, we can actually add this into our, into the actual resolution and maybe push this along if we feel strong enough on any of these things, because I think that a few of them actually kind of resonated with me also. So if it's amicable that we can actually do that and advise the city council that we kind of feel like these are some things you should consider, we might be able to do that.
Did you have something, Sergio? Commissioner Anthony?
Again, excellent presentations by the homeowner group. I'm almost a senior, so. But one of the things that I wanted to touch on, Commissioner Mama, she talked about this, the stormwater. The present company I'm working with, we have these stormwater cisterns and all this stuff, and I'm going to tell you, they don't work like you think they do, and so that's a concern. Those things do not always percolate down like you would like them to, and then when they do, you also have to come back and maintain them. You have to continually maintain those things. You get about 8 years on them, and then you got to dig them up and redo it, because that's the way they work. And I don't know how you're going to do that once that's developed. The other thing was the egress safety. Again, I didn't see the traffic study. I didn't see all the information on that. It's a lot of paperwork here that we're trying to go through. But I'm big on that egress. You said that you had a study on that, the traffic and things of that nature. I can't see that. I can't. You have a church there. You have seniors. You have the golf course right down the street. There's a lot of factors that would go into an emergency situation, which is not your regular traffic. I get that. But the emergency situation where you got people trying to get out of a spot, and you have seniors, which are not as quick on the draw as some of these young buckaroos, right? So you're trying to get out of these places, and I would consider that. The slope, the wall, you're gonna have some nice color to it, some greenery. I like that. it's still a big wall, okay? But if the engineering is right and you get the greenery, I'm not so much opposed to that. But outside of that, again, the parking situation with the church next to them, they did bring up one point, Jonathan did, when he talked about there was an additional easement. And I don't think we still got that clear. The additional easement that he talked about, was that?
Let Sergio do.
So, Commissioners, the only encumbrance that we're familiar with that's in favor of the church on the project, the subject site, is this reciprocal parking agreement. I'm not familiar with any other easements. Manny
we
reviewed
have
title. There was no other evidence of any other existing easements that have been recorded against the property at 503 Vista Bella in favor of the church.
He used it as an analogy with his fence. Maybe you might have thought of that.
Well, can we have him come up?
Jonathan, can you clarify?
There's three, per this agreement, as it's signed by both parties, it's reciprocal for parking, agreement for reciprocal parking easement. So it is an easement. The second one, the two other additional are for signage. So there are two other spots where we can have signs, and we have easements on that property as well. But they are all easements, not just agreements, but easements.
Okay,
Thank you.
Clarify.
thank you. That was, yeah.
I can,
Would you like to make a recommendation, Tom?
well, not without a long, drawn-out statement first. I always do that. No, I'll start by saying thank you again, everybody, for all of your input. It's good. We've wrestled with this issue of projects, as one of the applicant's consultants indicated, that are a lot different than they used to be. They're large, lots of density, and their characters often do not fit with the neighborhood character. And we've wrestled with that up here. Every city, frankly, is wrestling with this now, but because it's state law. So all we can do, and I've said this a few times as projects come forward to us, all we can do is try to make a statement at a meeting like this, talk to staff to make sure that when they meet with the developers, that they bring a really high-quality project to this commission, so that so at least we feel we got something out of it. It's got some quality. From what I've seen of the renderings, this has some quality. The scale is large, to put it mildly. So, but that's what the state law provides developers at this point. That all being said, I would like to make a motion, but I want to make sure that we capture a few things in that motion. So the first is that the resolution put before us, which is very generic, also has language in the section that deals with parking that addresses this parking agreement, this easement that the church has with the applicant, that it acknowledges it, that it it has some language in there that it essentially codifies that it does exist, and the church has a right to maintain that parking agreement, this easement. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be to also introduce, I don't know if we can codify this in the resolution, but the suggestions by the Oceana group, the 5 minus the age restriction, so really 4 of them, as solutions to try to move this forward, again, to make this more palatable to the community. I liked all of them. The age restriction one we threw out because it doesn't apply here. But the others are great, and I'd like to see those worked out between the residents and the applicant. And I don't know, Jonathan, or excuse me, Sergio, if we put that in the resolution or if that's done administratively, but I would really like to have those captured as part of our effort here, should we decide we want to push this forward. I think that kind of captures just about everything. I'll put all that as a motion to approve with those stipulations.
Commissioner Rosales, let me address the 5 points that the Oceana group make, maybe with the exception of the age restriction. We've kind of gone over that. The evacuation plan, as an example, there's no need. There isn't nothing that mandates an evacuation plan. It could be something that is done voluntarily, and we have our fire chief here and our fire captain here could further explain how that could work. We've done it once before on a different project down in the southern part of town in the Ocean Hills area when an assisted living facility came forward. There was some concern expressed similar to what's been expressed here tonight. And so as part of the condition of approval, that was added to the project that prior to, I'm not sure what the threshold or what the benchmark was, but there was a requirement for this evacuation plan to be prepared, and the city participated in that. So that's something that I think is doable, but it's not. I want to make it clear, it's not a requirement of this.
No, not a requirement. It's just the term "feel good" is wrong, but it's a plan that gives confidence to the residents that, hey, we have something that was worked out with everybody, and this is how we're going to operate should we ever need to execute it. That's really essentially what it is.
With respect to the flashing pedestrian beacons, I think that's a novel and a good idea, but I'm not sure if there's a nexus for us to require that the developer do that. So then that puts the burden on the city to come up with funds and come up with a capital improvement project to install that. So I'm not sure what the nexus would be. We can have our city traffic engineer here. She may be able to provide some information on when do we require this. Typically, it's a feature for added safety as the plan expressed, but I'm not sure that we can compel the developer to foot that bill alone. And finally, with respect to the slope instability, obviously before any permits are issued, this is going to be fully engineered. Right now, seemingly what the community is asking for, that those engineering drawings, those final engineering drawings be prepared now before we make a decision on this project, where the staff would recommend that they follow the normal course of the engineering process, the final engineering process, and that is done prior to the issuance of any permit for work on site. So I think that's how we can address that. And finally,
But just to brush over that, the slope stability, so you're going to take into account the historic aspects of that whole area and what's been happening will be part of it. And then also the idea of that cistern and that whole water situation, like Commissioner Anthony pointed out in his own experience, those things have to have a maintenance plan that's highly on top of it. Like someone's got to be on top of it to make sure it's cleaned out and properly still functioning, because that could affect the stability of that wall.
so interestingly enough, before we allow a building to be occupied, there has to be a maintenance agreement entered into and bonds put in place for the maintenance in perpetuity of these stormwater facilities. So that's addressed.
That's part of it.
That's addressed during the final engineering process. And I'd like to hit on the last point here. This $200,000 is seemingly arbitrary, and it's a pot of money that would be available to the community. There's no nexus for us to require this type of fund.
I get all that. Thank you for clarifying it. I call it what it is. This is essentially a maybe we can't formalize it here, but a plan that's been asked for by the community of the developer and or the city, whoever the parties are. It's mostly a communication plan. It's like, hey, we're gonna go along with the fact that this big building is gonna come in our community, so we're gonna agree to sit down and you're gonna share your information with us, like the engineering drawings. You're gonna, we're gonna meet up periodically and talk about the maintenance of that storm drain thing. So it's really a plan to make sure that people knows what's going on, because it's a really different project for this community. And I just think it has to be in place. Mechanically, how it happens, I don't know. I'll let you figure that out. They're just saying, we need this. It gives us a lot more confidence. So how you do it is fine. But maybe the developer pays for some of this. I know that you may not want to obligate them to that, but I think it's on the table.
Yeah.
It's an ask.
It's an ask.
Yeah, it's an ask. We're just recommending to City Council, this is what we feel like. We've listened to the community. We agree with a lot of what the community has said. We're just recommending to the City Council that we feel like we'd like to also ask them to consider the same things we have.
Yeah.
So let me provide a little bit of clarification in the context of what we're asking the planning commission to do tonight. It's not a recommendation to council. This would be, the planning commission
Staff
can
recommends.
serve as the final acting body. Generally, these types of projects, whether it gets a positive, an affirmative vote from this body tonight or a negative vote, it's likely going to be appealed to city council. So certainly we can take these comments and concerns, and should this project get approved tonight, or should this project get denied tonight, and an appeal is filed, we could certainly include that narrative in any staff report that goes forward to city council.
If that's the case, then I think we need to add these points into our recommend, if we're going to approve it, we're going to reprove it with what we're just trying to say. It's
I
arbitrary.
think
We're
I
going
did
to add
that
the
already. I think
evacuation
in my
plans, all
motion that
that.
all of these
Put all that in there.
would be done.
Yeah.
I'll leave it to you procedurally how it happens.
Right.
Whether it's in the resolution or just a narrative to the city council, should it get appealed. But
Yeah.
I think I've already clarified, correct me if I'm wrong, in my motion that these things get built into our approval here
Right.
tonight, should we decide to do that.
So for the audience's sake, those would have to be conditions of approval that we would include in this as recommended by
Conditions of approval,
by the planning
including these
commission,
items, correct.
with the exception of the age restriction.
With the exception of the age restriction, correct. So
Okay.
I've made my motion. It includes all that.
So it's all the 4 plus the parking, right?
Yeah, the
Okay.
part.
Prior
yeah.
to, making your motion and finalizing your vote, you may want to ask the applicant if they're amenable to
Right.
these
Thank you for
added
reminding
points
us
as
this, yes.
conditions.
Guns.
Applicant, just nod your
All right, Ms.
head.
Gallagher.
Yes,
Thank you,
that'd be
Sergio.
great.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you. So we will evaluate all of these options. We can't agree to include them as conditions of approval for the project because if they're financially infeasible and it doesn't make the project work, we can't agree to that tonight. But we will agree to voluntarily evaluate whether any of them are possible.
Okay, so we need to capture that in terms of how we make the resolution. Thank you.
So, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah,
So
thank
you.
I would recommend if you're agreeable to what the applicant's counsel is representing, rather than making these conditions of approval, that these are things that are continually worked on between staff and the applicant. The only thing we can do is report back to this body what they were agreeable to or not. So it wouldn't have its teeth like a condition of approval would.
And
That's
how
the
are,
part there's
how
no
are we
teeth.
going to let the community know?
Yeah.
That's a great question. We'd have to establish some sort of communication protocol and criteria.
We can
Okay.
meet with them to update them.
Say again?
We can meet with them and update them after we've evaluated it. We're happy to do that.
Isn't this whole thing kind of based on health and safety as far as the only kind of latitude we have is based on that? And these points that the neighborhood brought up is kind of all based on that.
So the law,
So-
these are in the realm of health and safety, but what none of these points articulate is a violation of a written
No,
health
yeah,
and safety
exactly.
rule, which
They have
is
to be very-
the burden to meet to consider it a specific adverse impact.
They have to be almost black and white so, yes, Ms. Gallagher, if that communication would be robust and thorough with the community, then I could go along with that idea, and I would very much appreciate if you would do that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Great.
It's,
Okay. So we have the motion, so I'll let you
we
run
do
it.
have a motion, yeah. So we have the motion put forward. I need a second on that, but before we do that, a lot of issues that were discussed this evening. The challenges that we face as a community from state laws that mandate certain things are sometimes very difficult to both process and then to live with ultimately. But it is what it is right now in terms of how that state law operates, and we need to operate within that. It is an election year. The one way we can change things is by voting and exercising that right to change things at the state level. And so I just remind everybody of that. It is important, and a lot of times things change. We're not aware of them till well after the fact. In this case, we've exercised our rights here to ensure that everybody had a fair opportunity to present their issues. We've heard you at the community level, and we'll go forward. And can I get a second on this motion?
I second.
Okay, so we are now in, there we go.
Okay.
Let the record show that the motion passes 3-0 with Commissioner Balma voting no.
And that's just because of the fact that I don't know if I can trust the ability of they're going to come up with some reasons why they can't afford it, which they can. So I kind of, that's why I voted no, because I hope that you guys can really work with the people.